Good morning. Thank you. Trying to wake you up. Yeah, I learned this last year at the conference from Robert. I talked for a while and then he yelled good morning into the mic and woke everybody up. So I don't think anyone heard what I had to say. Welcome to Creating a Better Future by Revealing the Past. My name is Alana Blumenthal. I am on the executive board for Sema Hadithi African American Heritage and Culture Foundation, and I am also the director of the Brigham City Museums up in Brigham City. And I submitted the proposal for this session, but I was, I'm not nearly as involved in this particular project as Robert and Miss Betty were, so I am mostly just going to moderate and let them talk about their experiences. And if you guys have any questions, I'll run the mic out to you. So I'll pass it along.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Betty Sawyer. I am the director of Project Success Coalition, a local grassroots nonprofit that has led the Juneteenth movement in Utah for the past 33 years. Prior to coming to Utah, I did not know what Juneteenth was. I'm on the East Coast. We celebrated Kinta Day, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman kinds of things, but Juneteenth wasn't on our radar. So I was gladly introduced to the holiday and the day and fell in love with the history and made a commitment to continue to move until it was more institutionalized in the state of Utah. I'm glad to be here.
Hey, my name is Robert Burch, and I am the founder and executive director of Sema Hadithi African American Heritage and Culture Foundation, and I hold a couple other positions, and nationally at some African American organizations from New Jersey to Washington, D.C. So I stay pretty busy with this type of thing, and we're really excited about the idea of helping to reveal some of the history of Utah that so many people tell us that doesn't exist. And just so you know, Sema Hadithi is Swahili, but tell the story. So that is our whole point of existence, to make sure that we get the story out there, that people do know that there is a long and rich history of African Americans in the Utah territory, in the state of Utah, even before the state itself was founded.
All right, so I'm gonna get started. We're gonna advance the slide, if I can figure that out. And full credit to Jim Tabry for these slides. He did this part of this presentation at the Black History Conference, which if you didn't come this past year, it's in September. It'll be in September again next year. Please come. It's a really great conference, all focused on Black history from the Utah perspective. So all of these slides are his, and I will let them talk about the Community Remembrance Project for Salt Lake County.
Okay, the Equal Justice Initiative is a national organization that operates out of Montgomery, Alabama, founded, thank you, early in the morning, I'm sorry, founded by Byron Stevenson. Some of you might be familiar with him if you watched the movie with Jamie Foxx and what's that boy's name? Just Mercury, and I'm trying to remember the other actor's name, the lawyer who plays Byron Stevenson. Killmonger, what's his name? Michael B. Jordan. You knew who that was, right? So Michael B. Jordan played Byron Stevenson. And so when Mr. Stevenson got to Montgomery for that particular case to win the release of the man who was unjustly accused of murder and stuff like that, he decided to stay in Montgomery. And then he created the Equal Justice Initiative. And now there are like museums and monuments in Montgomery to commemorate and remember and discuss the lynchings of African Americans in America. They have documented so far about 3,700 cases of lynching of Black people in America. And that is very limited in scope because it's limited by date and it's limited by whether it was mob violence and things of that nature. So the scope of it means that there are literally a number, hundreds, maybe even thousands of other lynchings that will not be documented through this project. And the great reason for this particular project is to create community conversation like we're having today. When we first decided that we wanted to do soil collection in Utah, James Tabery and myself, LaShawn Williams, and others were contacting EJI individually and saying that we wanted to do this and we wanted to do this. And we went back and forth with EJI, I think, for about 3 or 4 years. Okay. And then eventually EJI finally made it clear to me that if you do not put together a community to do this project, you're not going to do this project. So that was the point of them constantly emailing me back and saying, you need to talk to Jim. And I'm like, who is this Jim guy? And you need to talk to LaShawn. And I knew LaShawn and some others. And so when I finally got it clear in my head that I need to talk to these other people, I started making the telephone calls and trying to connect. And we connect with several other people who said, yes, we need to do this. And it's been something all of us have wanted to do for years, and we have never gotten together the effort to get it done. So we started, and the thing that we began to realize is that EJI never really told us what they were trying to get us to do. They kind of let us find it. They would send us information. And then eventually we realized is that what they're saying is that we're no longer going to take individual submissions. We're no longer going to take stated submissions. You're either going to be an organized community within a county. And so you literally had to go to your county and talk to the churches and talk to the nonprofits and talk to all of these governmental officials and all of these things and get all of these people to sign off. And then we would let you do it. And so we ended up creating a list of about 24 nonprofits, churches, governmental organizations, training organizations, coaching, individual coaching organizations who would say, look, we'll take part in it, we're interested in it, and we'll work with you. Once we put that letter together with all of those people listed on it, and they said, okay, you can now do it. And that is what literally created the Salt Lake County Community Remembrance Coalition. And that coalition includes places like Calvary Baptist Church, Project Success, Sema Hadithi, Wave Coaching, NAACP, and just on, that type of list, Better Days, things of that nature. And so once they understood we was going to have a community effort by putting together that coalition, they then sent us instructions on how to proceed.
I would just add to that for Project Success Coalition, when Robert reached out to us, we were excited to join in, but in the back of my mind, it's like, okay, Remembrance Project, you know, talk about lynching. You think people are going to want to hear that story, because throughout so much of our history, you know, we want to tell the good and leave the bad and the ugly off to the side or hidden. And so I had to go back and talk to my own self about what I would bring to the table to be a part of this honoring, remembering, and commemoration, this part of Utah history. But at that particular time, I served on the National Juneteenth Board. And so we had just had a triumph in getting Juneteenth recognized as a federal holiday. And we were still working to get a state holiday passed. And for me, it was the right time. I looked at Juneteenth and having this as a part of our Juneteenth celebration, something to help galvanize that story, to galvanize the history, and use Juneteenth as a kind of springboard to explore other places, other stories, other histories that we have yet to tell.
And I've advanced the slide now kind of to show the program of the day. And I think that's a really good transition because you're talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly. So can you talk a little bit about how you came up with that program of the day and you know, how you combined remembrance and celebration on that day?
Okay, our program committee consisted of myself, Betty, James Tabery, Kirk Huffaker, Paul Reeves, with Jim and Paul being professors over at the University of Utah, and several others. And over time, we kind of talked through what do we want our presentation to feel like, what do we want people to take away from it. And so we spent several months going back and forth on what that should look like, because we know that we're dealing with a subject that is difficult for most people, and that those who would show up would be basically the congregation of the willing, as I would like to say, and those who wouldn't show up would be the ones who really don't feel, as Betty alluded to, that this is a type of conversation that we should be having, keeping in mind at the same time that we're part of this whole exercise is to meet the mission of the Equal Justice Initiative, is to stimulate conversations on why anybody would think that just taking a man out in the street and throwing him up in the tree is okay. And so those are very difficult conversations for people to have. We're not trying to judge whether that person was innocent or guilty of the crime that they may or may not committed, but is that the justice process that we say that we want to have in our communities, you know? And so that is also reflective into other things in our community as following equality, equity, justice. So this is just an opportunity to open up those conversations. At the same time, we wanted this event to be meaningful in the sense that it brought forth the heritage and the culture of our community now here in Utah, the spirit of love and community we wanted to create. And so that's why we had poets and singers. And you notice the Shalom Rav was sung by Joanna Charnes. So we included the Jewish community in our program. And if you stayed for the second half down on State Street, we had Puerto Rican dancers from the diaspora from Puerto Rico, Bumba Marilay. And so we were not necessarily saying that what happened or may have happened for these men were right or wrong, but we should commemorate the spirit that we want to have in our community so these type of things don't happen again. And that's why we had messages from Pastor Moses, his wife Jacqueline, and included BYU and things of that nature. So we really wanted to make sure that this is a program that the community could appreciate and that was meaningful and expressive of how we feel about justice and equity, but also how we feel about and celebrate our lives today.
And along with that, as we come together, as Robert said, we had to think about our culture, you know, the singing, the dancing, the prayer. We are very faith-centered people. And we know that anytime we talk about these histories, it has different impacts on people. And so that part about the healing and the spiritual side of that is always included in the work that we do. And it resonated throughout the day. I mean, it was tremendous. The conversations that people were even having then and the feelings that people were having. And we may talk about it later, but even, you know, touching the soil. And we know that there have been thousands of people that had been across the soil since and all kinds of things, but that was still a connection to parts of our ancestry that I felt even in putting my hands in the soil, just like when I would go to my grandfather's farm and he'd had me out digging and planting, and I didn't understand the why. But for him, that was a big part of their freedom story, to be able to purchase and own land themselves, something that had been denied them. And so we have this strong affinity to the soil.
And so that day was really part of the point of it was to collect this soil, as Betty mentioned. And if we can get you to go back to slide 3 for me. Right there. So this is the exhibit that's in Montgomery, Alabama. And you see the jars on the left. And the notable thing about to me is that look at all the different types of soil across the country. And thinking about the different type of individuals that lost their lives at those locations. And then compare those jars on the left to the picture of the woman looking up at the blocks on the right. Each one of those blocks signifies someone that was lynched. This is a very powerful place to visit if you ever get the chance, because it really makes you think about the things that we might do to each other. But collecting that soil, and if you go back to slide number 5 for me. Yeah, that one right there. You will see at the top right-hand corner, I believe it is, yes, the 2 jars that we collected for Thomas Coleman and William Harvey. That was an event that happened that day, and just immediately you see one of the jars there with a spoon that's being filled in. So it was a very solemn occasion, at the same time a very celebratory occasion, and we gave people the opportunity to touch the soil, dip into the soil, and help fill those jars.
And we happened to bring a couple of those spoons. We had commemorative spoons, so everyone was able to participate in that event with the names of both of the gentlemen. And being a transplant to Utah, I'd heard about lynching in Price. I never heard about these 2 gentlemen in the Salt Lake City area. So again, I was learning something and embracing something new myself to add to my Utah history story. And a part of this is for us to remember that the ability to add to this collective memory is something that all of us should embrace and be a part of. It is our stories. And when you tell half of the story, then, you know, what about that other big piece? And so the work that we continue to do is how we can tell these more complete stories. So.
Well, and that's perfect, because I think we can transition now in the next slide to talking about what resources were created beyond the day. So I've pulled up, there is now raciallynchingin-utah.org, hosted by the Marriott Library. And you want to kind of talk a little bit about what's been collected and the partnerships that you were able to make in order to get these things available to the public beyond that one day and that one event.
As I explained, excuse me, as I explained earlier, there was a lot of conversations that happened even prior to us getting this far, because EGI insisted that we bring in the community. And so that meant a lot of conversations with a lot of different organizations over time, which probably I think is one of the most important things that we can do to promote even what we do as museums and nonprofits and others in the community now, is that in order to affect the change that we are looking for, we have to go visit and we have to go talk. And that's kind of what Betty talked about yesterday, is that we have to meet people where they are and kindly with kindness, explain what it is that we are trying to accomplish, and ask them to join us on that journey. Invite them to be a part, and allow them to express what they need to express in that desire to be a part of what it is that you're trying to do for your organization, and most of all, for the community. So it was a lot of work to get this far. We had a lot of Zoom meetings, a lot of telephone calls, a lot of coffee meetings, a lot of lunches and things to get to where we are now. When we look at this racial lynching in Utah website that was set up by the Marriott, this is the effort of Paul Reeve and Jim Tabor at the University of Utah. And if you don't know, these guys do great research and teach classes on African American history, race relations, researching. Paul actually put together a previous website that we don't have a slide for, called Century of Black Mormons, the first 100 years of the LDS Church and the Black Latter-day Saints that were a part of the church from the beginning. And so these two gentlemen are particularly familiar with the history of Black folk in Utah. And so we was pretty fortunate to have Paul and Jim as a part of that, because they were really the connection to be able to get this website, this page put up. Interesting enough, this is the first time I've ever seen this front page of this, but that's me and Betty there filling in William Joe Harvey's or jar. So I find that interesting. But it allows you to go through it and learn about Thomas and learn about Williams. And our really big objective with these two tabs for Thomas and William was that we wanted to be able to show that they were human beings. So we went to do their genealogy, their family histories, whatever we could do to kind of humanize the two men, to let people understand who they truly were. But this has also led to other projects that we're now trying to do with the University of Utah. And I would say part of that effort that we put together, especially with Betty with Juneteenth, this was the biggest, craziest Juneteenth I've ever participated in. We literally, for Utah Juneteenth Committee, put on 15 events in 21 days. Sema Hadithi put on 16 events in 22 days. So we started the day before June. We started the very last day of May. And to start celebrating Juneteenth. So, but you can see the kind of coalition building and talking to people and bringing other people on board that allow Betty and Sema and others to produce something this year that has been bigger than anything that we've ever been able to do in the past, especially with Betty's work with the governor in order to help get Juneteenth not just a national holiday, but a state holiday. And we felt great that this would be a part of that larger celebration. And to be honest, most places in the United States only celebrate Juneteenth 1 or 2 days. We end up celebrating it the whole month. So from Ogden to Salt Lake City to Utah County, oh yeah, so that's right. So even up to Logan. And so this type of thing has helped us to be able to reach a lot of people who didn't know that there was lynchings in Utah. Many of which didn't even know there were slaves in Utah, and all the other stories of Black history in Utah since 1822. So we feel like this event, as well as others, has placed us in a position to have a strong group, a strong body of people who can help us drive forward the stories of Utah that you may not ever see otherwise.
And one of the other fun things about the project that it brought together scholars, students, community voices, the faith community, a little bit of everyone had to come together to make this successful. And that's the kind of work that we encourage for all of the things that we're doing as we look to reveal history, to remember, to restore, to preserve, and then, Sema Hadithi, to tell that story, to make sure that we're passing it along. And in us telling our story, other stories get uncovered along the way and things that we can add to that historical record. And just remembering that our history is American history. Oftentimes, and for far too long, we've separated indigenous history from the history of other settlers and other immigrants and from Blacks and Latinx. All of this is American history. All of this is world history. And so when we enter these spaces, we need to be asking, have we left someone out? Is there another story here? Who else could have been there other than the one I'm reading about? I don't know if any of you have had the chance to watch the documentary on the slave ship that came into Mobile, Alabama, Clotilda. But in that, it was so interesting to hear that while the people in Africa town, the Blacks whose ancestors had come on the ship were talking about it, nobody else was talking about it. So they could have been in school with folk from the Meyer family that owned the shipyards, to the captain's family that sailed the ship, bringing them from the west coast of Africa into this country, and never knew it. And one of the descendants said, that family, they can really keep a secret. How come nobody, because if they were in my family, somebody would have told by now, whether it was at the barbecue or somebody drank too much, or, you just had to get it out. You don't keep secrets like that. And even in them coming together to share and celebrate when they found the vessel, is that family going to show up? But think about that part of the history that didn't get told yet. And how wonderful would that have been that their families could have been a part of telling the story versus just having one group of people telling that story.
Perfect transition to what's next and what other stories there are to tell. So, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, we got anybody from Price, and I can let Robert kind of talk about what's next.
Just trying to see if Tim happened to be in here this morning. Because we've already started reaching out to the folk in Price and trying to put together the same type of coalition, because it's going to be an entirely brand new submission process. The Salt Lake Community Coalition is a total different separate entity from what would be the Carbon County Coalition. So we're working with, I believe his name is Riley. Yeah, Tim Riley, who's down in that area to help to try to put together the same type of coalition so that in January, when we make the submission to the Equal Justice Initiative, we won't have as many struggles as we did the first time. Sometimes experience is the best teacher. So we've learned from the work we've done in Salt Lake County, and it would be able to drive the effort down into Price forward faster, since we now understand what it is that we should be trying to accomplish. But as you see there, Robert Marshall was lynched in Price in 1925. And I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with the history of Price or from Price. I think the sensitivity down there is a little bit different than the sensibility in Salt Lake County. And so we understand that it's going to be a challenge, and we want to get started early. And we do invite you guys to be a part, because we do want it to be a community conversation. Also in June, we're preparing to do markers like the one you're looking at from Tuscaloosa County, Alabama there. We are hoping to work with the state as well as the federal government, because both of these properties, one is state property, the other one is federal property, to get these two markers installed. For Thomas Coleman, Arsenal Hill was where he was lynched, which is now the state capitol. Thomas Coleman was lynched because he was caught flirting up there with his white girlfriend. And so someone felt it wasn't appropriate that he should be hanging out with a white woman, so they killed him. And the interesting thing about Thomas Coleman is this was a lynching that did not fit the parameters of the Equal Justice Initiative. So we had to do the research. That's why you see those the certificate there and things of that nature for, and that one's for Robert Marshall, isn't it? But anyway, we had to do research and write up a report on why Thomas Coleman should be included in the National Lynching Project. And so over time, as we got that submitted, the Equal Justice Initiative accepted it. Again, I credit that to Paul and Jim to be able to recognize that lynching. And down on State Street near 100 South is the Russell Wallace Federal Building. That federal building stands on land that used to be the Salt Lake City Jail. And that is where William Joe Harvey was lynched. But this is where we're going to be moving forward into the future here with the project of doing the soil collection in Price and doing the marker placements on Capitol Hill and at the federal building. Again, from this also are all the other great things that have sprung up from the coalition that we've been able to create with the Salt Lake Community Remembrance Project. Is hopefully some kind of initiative to get Juneteenth more of a state-driven, state-focused project to get more people involved in Juneteenth. And Betty can talk a little bit better on that than I can. And just the things we're doing now. This year we've had an outstanding Black History Conference because of our state partners and because of the corporations that have seen what we're doing and coming on to support us. And so even though we know that this is a sensitive topic, there are those in the community and in corporate America and in the states who are appreciative that we're driving these stories forward. In the program, I think Alana, I don't have the program to read it verbatim. There we go. And here she says, imagining a world where education can spend more energy on telling the truth and less energy fighting over lies. We spend a lot of our time not just arguing and fighting, but the things that we're arguing and fighting over are not real, right? Whether you call it CRT or any of these other things, those are things that people create to mislead our thinking and to confuse us. So if we're going to have disagreement, let us agree that we disagree about the truth and not about a lie. Let's not keep spinning our wheels, because the fact of the matter is we'll never get anywhere because we're fighting over something that is not real. So these things help us to begin to have those truthful conversations about truthful things in our community.
Thank you. Along with the passage of the Juneteenth holiday bill, this year, and Representative Sandra Hollins and Senator Jake Andreas sponsored that bill. And like 5 years prior, Representative Holland has sponsored, we tried to get Juneteenth passed at that time in 2016, and Governor Bangor at the time, we ended up with a day of observance. And so we did embrace that as well, but continue to work toward getting the holiday passed as other states across the United States. And Utah became number 11. That's enough to be excited about. Yes, number 11 in Utah, with our small population of Black folk, to get a state holiday for Juneteenth. You can imagine when I go to the national conference with everybody, like, Utah. I say, that's right, Utah. Don't throw no shade on us, because we got it going on. And so that's something that we can all be proud of. And this year, because of the first holiday, we had several cities, and I had the opportunity to present at a couple of city council meetings, because again, people are like, Juneteenth, why do we, what is it first? And then why do we need to celebrate it? And so how many of your cities, how many are in places that recognize Juneteenth this year? How many jumped on board? Give yourselves a big hand, because I'm sure you all had something to do with that. Because again, getting the word out, even though we've been doing it myself over 30 years, but prior to me, people have been celebrating Juneteenth in Utah, probably about 50 or more years. A lot of folk from Texas, they brought the holiday with them, and they did it, whether it was a small celebration. But the first one I went to was at Jordan Park with the Salt Lake NAACP. They had a Juneteenth celebration every year at Jordan Park, and they would have, you know, music, dancing, and they would end the day with a baseball game, the brothers. So it was fun and exciting. And then they decided not to do it one year. Well, they didn't rent the park, and there was a park available. And I said, wait a minute, let me call my buddy in Ogden and see if we can have it at the Marshall White Center. And he says, come on up. And that's how I really got engaged in the process. But along with the holiday bill being passed this past year, ethnic studies bill was also passed. And so this is a process to help open the door to all of us being a part of telling this inclusive history. And so in all of your prospective places, you have the opportunity to be engaged in what that looks like versus someone else seeing what that story is going to look like, what that history is going to look like. The Utah Education Network, when the federal bill was passed, they reached out immediately and put resources on their website around Juneteenth. So you can go there and find some curriculum and books and reading materials to help you out, as well as going to the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation. We have a document that's called Juneteenth 101. And we're adding to that all the time because we're uncovering new facts. And we have historians and educators that are working on that every day as we uncover information to pass that on, to get that included in the record. And that's what all of you do all the time. And so I invite you to be a part of our Juneteenth movement. You signing up? Come on, I'm looking, I'm watching. There's gonna be a test because you don't get to do this work by yourself. And as it grows, more and more people are asking, can you come and help us? What can we do? How should we do it? And so it's gonna take all of us to really make Juneteenth what we think it needs to be in the state of Utah.
Right, and so again, I think probably the most significant thing is that there are townships and cities that you probably live in who are in the next several years are going to be trying to create Juneteenth events. And so they're going to need people who are either one experienced or who understand it so that they help guide them through that. And that is one of our biggest concerns, is that as we turn the community towards these things, is to help them through that process of understanding what is the significance of Juneteenth, why is it important to your community, and how do we do it without making some of the mistakes that we've made in the past. And I'm being very gentle about that, because sometimes people jump on board things and they make mistakes, not knowing that what they're doing is probably incorrect. And so we hope that as we drive forwards, like especially things like this soil collection, that you can take it back to your community and have a conversation about why it is inappropriate to do some of the things that we have done, whether it is mob lynchings in the street, or whether it is the problem that we're really dealing with here in the United States now, the mass killings of people. So this goes to a lot of the things that we're trying to address as a society, is trying to have conversation with folks to help them understand why it is not right for you to try to take justice into your own hands, why we have a justice system, why we have people who show up in schools and in churches and places like that and do these mass killings. So this is something that I believe his name was Eric Holder. He was the first, what is it called? Attorney General, Black Attorney General to the United States. And one of the things that he was criticized early in his tenure was that he made a statement that Americans are cowards when it comes to talking about race. And he was immediately criticized and ostracized for making that statement. But what he is trying to address is that until we can meet each other in truth, not lies, we can't address and resolve some of the racial and gender and pay issues and things of that nature that still exist in this country. And you've seen that since he's been Attorney General, a lot of these things have become increasingly worse, not better. So at some point, we have to summon the courage to talk to each other so that we can resolve these issues. And these lynching projects is designed to help you do that. And so I would say you could go on the Marriott Library website, study it and read it out, and have conversations in your community about these type of things. And if you find it difficult yourself, that you need help getting through those conversations, you can contact us and we'll try to set up a time where we come down with you and those you want to gather in your community and help you lead these conversations. But many of these conversations are not going to be had until you have them, because of course we can't be everywhere and we can't teach everything. But that is our hope, is to help us begin to have more of a conversation on truth and resolve our true issues so that we can go on and be more the beloved community that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. expressed so long ago.
I'm gonna open it up because I've already gotten that 15 minutes left sign and really want to engage you guys. So I'm gonna forget about the questions I wrote down. The only thing I'll point out is, and we talked about Juneteenth, and Utah does it for a whole month. There's also Black History Month, but I would encourage you, and this little plug for my museum up in Brigham City, we are bringing the Sema Hadithi curated a traveling exhibit about Black veterans in Utah. And we're bringing it to our museum with an event for Veterans Day, not for Black History Month. It's a small thing, but it's worth pointing out. You've never seen people more exhausted than these three at the end of Juneteenth. So call them in, December. Yes, Black people exist all year. So anyway, with that, if anyone has any questions, I'm going to be running this microphone around and just let them answer, or comments or suggestions of how your organization can help them do their work. Anything you want to share?
Thank you. This project you guys have done is incredible. Thank you for all the work that you've put into making this community, creating this community in Utah. I am excited to find ways for us to, I work at the Natural History Museum of Utah. We've got lots of resources and we want to be able to support this work. So like, let's talk after this about how we can work. But immediately, I want to know if you have like resources or information that we could be distributing to people at our museum about the soil project.
Yes.
Great. Let's do that. We want to do that.
So actually, we're putting together, and my brain is still asleep this morning, so I know I've been kind of slurring, but I wasn't thinking when I came down here because I could have actually brought those jars with me so you can see them because they're really huge. They're really huge. But we will be having that exhibit circulate the state. And the only way you will be able to get that exhibit at your museum or your library is that you will be able to secure it in a case, a protected case. Because we understand that there are people who may not necessarily like the exhibit being in their town. And so if you could be able to place it in a case to secure it, then we will be able to put you on a list to have that circulate through your library or your museum or whatever. So you just reach out to us and let us know about it. And as well as other projects, other exhibits, like Alana said that we're going to be sending her the veterans exhibit, which would then be going to Hiram City Library. We also hope to be able to put together a mural exhibit from Richmond Park. And I'm sorry, my brain is not working. I know there's at least one or two others that we're going to be circulating to. And so if you contact us and we make sure that we get you on our museum list or library list or whatever that you need to be placed on, to make sure that when these become available to be circulated, that we can make sure that you're added to that circulation.
And we did bring a few of the programs from this celebration, so please feel free to grab one if you're interested, just to keep that foremost in your mind. And like I said, we had a couple of spoons that we put together, so yes.
And I'll just point out, because I realize not everyone in the room might be familiar with the work that Sema Hadithi does. The main work being done right now involves volunteer research groups. So there's a women's working group, there's a church history working group, there's a Buffalo Soldiers working group that's very active. So those resources are being built every day by volunteers in our historical community. So one, a plug, get involved, join a working group. We'd love to have your expertise. And two, there'll be more and more resources available on the Sema Hadithi website and other, the Marriott Library. We also are working, we have a repository agreement with State History to begin a collection that can be properly stored and cared for while we're developing a museum space. So those resources are being built every day, and they're being built by people like the people in this room, or by some of the people in this room in some cases. So any other questions or comments? I can head back up. I have plenty of questions for you guys, so you guys don't want to get involved. Let's see what's a good one to kind of try to do the last 10 minutes on. We covered a lot of this in your talk, but here's a good one. I think a lot of us represent historic preservation through sites or one way or another. So can you kind of communicate, you talked about a little, Miss Betty, but what it meant to handle the soil yourself? Because they had these spoons, but most people ended up at the end of the day using their hands to transfer the soil into the jar. And that was a very powerful moment, I think, for everybody involved. And for those of us who do history work, we're mostly interpreting places as well as people. So what can sites be doing to integrate that emotional sense of place?
I would say that as you do the work, do your best to record it as well. Not just the photograph, but videography as well, because those are the things that engage us. I know one of the vendors has the virtual museums and virtual tours. That's where we are right now. We're not as mobile as we used to be going to places. And I'm sure all of your museums and places have experienced those declines in visitors, but being able to create your own work that you could show while we're waiting for others to develop these projects is really important. One of the projects that we've been working on in the Ogden area, we have the Marshall White Community Center was up until like 4 years ago, the only public building in the state of Utah named after an African American. And the swimming pool had a big crack in it. They closed that down. There was just a lack of investment, and we can speculate why that was the case. But anyway, the city wanted to tear it down and all of that. We said, no, rebuild, build a new center. We need this. But in building that building, I reached out to Weber State's archives and said, can you bring your scanning equipment? Can we work with some students to collect some stories? The center was there over 60 years, impacting primarily the Black and brown community. It was a hub of community. And we can't just let it get torn down. They're going to put a fence around it, tear it all down, and then, oh, well, you know, wait for a new center to come. We need to be able to collect those stories and preserve those stories so that we, in turn, can retell those stories, because they were people's lives. My kids, I have 4 sons, they're all grown, but they used to laugh and say that the center was the place I got my first kiss. That was the first fight I had, you know, those kinds of things, and the sports, the recreation, the dances, the everything that went on, that was a heartbeat of that community for that long. So I just encourage us to look around our communities. Years ago, when we did the State Centennial Project, I happened to be in the governor's office at the time, but we went up to Brigham City. We heard about burial grounds and where we thought people were and things of that nature, and just try to do the best we could to meet with folk that had more information than we did to tell that story. And so we just encourage you to continue to do that wherever you are, and using multiple platforms and formats to do that.
You're gonna let me leave. I'm gonna leave. We got like 4 more minutes probably, and I'm gonna ask the biggest question on my list. But this session is really all about truth telling. We talked, you know, fight the lies, and or don't even fight the lies. Ignore the lies, tell the truth anyway. So what's your advice on being unafraid in that work?
Shame the devil and tell the truth. Shame the devil.
And ancestral memory has to be restored. You know, we could waste our time with that stuff, but we all prefer not to, because it's too much work to be done, right? It's too much real work. And so one of my personal mottos that I use for myself, my children, and everyone I encounter is do it afraid. Fear is a natural response. You know, people assume that me walking into these rooms for 40 years, oftentimes as the only Black person, I wasn't scared. Come on. Okay, speaking up, you don't think I'm afraid at times to speak up? Because when you speak up, Kate Kirkland, who was a professor at BYU years ago, when the whole diversity training first started, said this thing about standing alone. You know, there's a price you pay to stand up, stand alone, to speak up when everyone in the room is like, your job, your livelihood, promotions, all of that. And I tell people every day, count the cost. You know, let's be real. Everybody can't be a Miss Betty, you know, and just say it and not worry about, but there was a time when I worried because I had 4 young kids. I have grown kids, they can help me now, okay? So losing a job is not priority for me, but for some people that's real. But we still have to find a way to do it afraid. And I say do it afraid until your fear turns to faith. That's a Bettyology. So use that when you encounter those times when you know what's being said is not truthful. Do it afraid until your fear turns to faith, because there's someone else in that same arena who's having the same thoughts as you and want to say it, but they're afraid to say it as well. And so have the courage to still do it afraid.
And quickly, one of the things that Alice and I have had experience as we've gone out and talked with people is that there is something that happens when you keep the truth from people, especially after they learn something that they should have learned from you. Meaning this, and this has happened to us on more than one occasion. A 14-year-old girl who's adopted by white parents, have never been told anything about American history as it's related to slavery, because slavery was that story we don't want to talk about, right? And she goes to school and they start studying American history around the 1800s. And guess what comes up? A lot of stories on slavery. And she go home and she looks at her white parents and she says, I no longer trust you. You lied to me. We can have this argument about the lie of CRT and things are related to, and you can even change the narrative, teach it differently in school books. That's what they've done in Texas. In Texas, they have pictures of a black man in a European suit, his wife in a very beautiful European dress, and his kids in knickers, and they look like they came directly from London. And these folks came here as immigrants. That is the narrative that they present in some schools in Texas. But now, what happens to that 14-year-old child when they leave that school system that have taught them that lie, and America tells them that you are wrong? Just because you want to lie to your children does not mean I'm going to lie to mine. And sooner or later, those two children are going to meet as adults, and we're going to keep battling over the lie. So the idea is not to go out and try to say that one child is better than the other, which is what the people who want to get on the CRT bandwagon. It is not about that. It is about creating an environment where our children are in the same place where they can have honest conversations and get past it, okay? So understand, we have to teach our children the truth, or we're gonna keep having these conversations 200 years from now that we've had for the last 200 years, okay?
Okay, thanks everybody.